intro to, let's see, all right, it's putting GitHub at your fingertips. Very excited about this session. This session is going to be brought to you by Neha Berta. She's a senior engineering manager at GitHub. She's passionate about making tech industry easier and more inclusive. I'll let you take it from here, Neha.
Thank you. As introduced, I'm Neha, and I'm part of the team that builds GitHub's client applications, which is how I refer to the group of products that is mobile, CLI, and desktop. So we've shipped a lot of stuff in the past year to bridge gaps that you've been facing as our users. And that's actually how GitHub Mobile and GitHub CLI came about this year. Our angle is pretty simple. It's about meeting you where you are and helping you create a workflow that feels like home for you. And that's more important now than ever. GitHub's tools should be serving you and help be flexible in supporting you and how you adjust to doing your work, whether that's on your computer or on your phone. So I'm here to share some ways you can do that depending on your needs and preferences. The bulk of this session will cover these existing Git and GitHub workflows, and I'll layer in how you might augment those workflows using client applications. But I've left a little bit of time at the end of the talk to talk about key features, give you a sneak peek about what's coming up, and to share my one-pager on how to try these tools and give us feedback. All right, so let's get started. I can't see you, so I'm just going to assume you're as excited as I am about this because it's time to reflect. All right, so you're at home. Maybe you put on some real pants today. Probably not, though. And you get to your computer because it's time to write some code. That's a simple task, right? Wrong. So there's so many things that you need to do before you get one task done. And that starts with sorting through your tasks, picking it, working on the task, requesting others to review it, and eventually merging into the code base. Maybe you're even kicking off a release. There's nothing like reliving how complicated we've made this world than by explaining it to someone who's not in tech. It's a lot of steps and it can feel unnecessary at times. We've all been there. Part of our job as technologists is to figure out how we can simplify these tasks. So let's break the base case down. So first we have our Git workflows, which you mostly perform on your local computer. This represents the majority of our branch and commit flows, but there are a few times even after you open a pull request where you might need to work locally, like when you're making changes, testing a pull request, or tagging a release. Then we have the GitHub workflows, which are usually concentrated around managing your tasks, code reviewing, merging, and releasing. This doesn't include other apps you might use, like a project or task manager, your editor, or any other scripts you have to run. So we saw the base case. Let's talk about GitHub Desktop. If you're a GitHub Desktop user, chances are you don't mind using a GUI, especially for your local tasks that Git would otherwise cover. In fact, you might prefer it. That's why GitHub Desktop's workflows cover almost all of Git workflows shown here, with a little smidgen of GitHub tasks to save you another back and forth cycle. But in general, Desktop doesn't cover a lot of GitHub flows because GitHub's also an amazing GUI. And so its responsibility is more to get you to where you need to go faster than it is to duplicate all of the workflows. Now, on the other hand, GitHub CLI is for people that prefer to use their terminals. So instead, GitHub CLI brings the workflows that you do on GitHub to your terminal, so you can execute them alongside Git. That's why you'll see a lot of overlap with GitHub workflows, but not Git workflows, unless there's a GitHub component associated with it. And finally, GitHub Mobile is for those GitHub on-the-go tasks that you might do intermittently or you could do in under 5 minutes. Because it's unlikely that you're currently coding on your phone, it helps you concentrate on helping you manage your tasks, review code, and merge it. So in a nutshell, those are the 5 tools that you have to customize, right? GitHub.com, Desktop, CLI, and Mobile. It looks a bit chaotic here, but it helps to keep in mind that depending on your situation and preference, we provide you these alternatives when it can speed up your work and make you more productive. And the best part is that we're actively releasing new things. You can already see how some of these coming soon features round out our workflow coverage, and I'll hint at some of them as we go along. Okay, so I've done all the telling I need to do so far, but I'd also like to show you how your workflow can change by stepping through each of the steps and showing you how the base case and what the base case looks like and how you might augment them. Real quick before we get started, I've laid out my slides in a certain way to help you keep track of what's going on because there's a lot that goes into your workflow, right? So here's a few things to look out for in these slides. So on the left-hand side, I'll keep track of your task. And so it aligns with the workflow diagram that I introduced. And on the right-hand side, I have the tool that I'm talking about, and that's color-coded too. So we'll be bouncing between these different tools because that's the point of the talk. Just keep an eye out. All right. First things first, at the beginning or end of the day or at an end of a task, you're going to want to check in the mission control and hear what you've been missing out on since you've been gone. So usually you might go to GitHub notification pages, which helps you see what's happening across multiple repositories according to the filters that you choose. Additionally, you might create an issue and eventually you select a task to assign yourself. That's the basic landscape of task management and selection, which happens on .com. But if you're not already browsing on .com, there are a few things you can do with GitHub's client applications that help you manage your tasks. GitHub Desktop provides the options to, 1, create an issue, which you can do from the menu item. I didn't include that in the screenshot. And then 2, check out a list of pull requests that you can open your repository, and it'll give you a little bit of a signal on status to help you understand what's changed. I know it's silly, but Desktop lets me create an issue with one shortcut, so that's my go-to. It's definitely way easier than clicking around in a browser. If you want to manage some of your tasks by the terminal with GitHub CLI, there's tons of commands you can use. My favorite one is here. So that's GHPR status, because it gives me just enough information to figure out what my next move is. Do I respond to an outstanding PR or do I review someone else's? By the way, this works for issues too. So you can try out GH issue status, and then you can use the view command to view more context. You can also create issues with the predictable command GH issue create. You see there's a pattern here, right? I love that it lets you select your issue templates and gives you prompts to type in your title, which obviously is mandatory. And then you can type in your body or skip it and then select what you want to do next. I usually find myself skipping the body to type in the browser so I can preview my markdown. The best part is, if you want to skip any of the prompts, you can pass in flags, and I'll provide an example with PRs later on. Now, most of the time when it comes to triaging, I'm just so productive and on top of my game that I need to do it on the go. I'm lying. So real talk, I'm really lazy and I hate getting out of bed. So mobile's notification menu is what I use the most when I want to see if anything's blocking on me so I can justify sleeping another hour, which is a hot tip from me. I am not liable for the consequences, though, if you try it. So you can also create issues within mobile and assign yourself to the task so that by the time you get back to your computer, you can just get started. What I like about all of these alternatives for managing tasks is that in whatever GitHub tool you're using, if you want to check out what's new in the world, you can check it out just from where you are. All right, stage 2, branches. Now that you know what you want to work on, you have to prepare your environment by getting into the right repository and branching. At some point, you have to create your repository or clone your repositories or fork the repository, and then you have to get that URL and you have to clone it locally, right? So then after that, it's time to create your branches, which you can do on github.com. So I kind of showed this here, but usually the majority of that work happens locally. Once you get to your local machine, if you don't have the repository yet, you'll do this one-time task of pasting the URL to clone the repo and then create the branch you want to work on. And also, by the way, if you're on a fork, you also have to set your own upstream and you can't even get the updates easily. So it's kind of a mess. Yes, using GitHub and Git to clone a repository feels inefficient to me. Let's look at how we can make this easier. GitHub Desktop lets you easily switch between repositories, and it even detects if you're on a protected branch if you have that feature enabled, so that you have a seamless way to create a branch and start your work. In the larger scheme of things, Desktop lets you clone repositories, create them, and even handles your workflow by setting your upstream for you. This is my go-to for getting repositories because I can see what I've added in the repository menu. I love that. GitHub CLI also lets you create, clone, and fork. For forking, it even offers to add a remote, which you can see here. And it's a subtle touch, but one of my favorite things is how GitHub CLI responds to your commands, even when things are going well. So I just get these check marks. So it says when the fork's been created, when my origin's been renamed. It feels like I'm the boss and my computer is giving me good news, you know? Both Desktop and CLI handle your repositories without switching contexts, copying information, and don't make you look up how to set your upstreams or sync your local and .com repositories. Okay, hooray! We've made it to the stage where you know what you want to change in the code base. So that's the commit stage. This is the time where we write those changes. And it actually took me way too long to figure out that for smaller commits, you can write that code directly in github.com and commit it. I do this when I'm updating readmes or copy. Basically, when I don't need to run tests before opening the pull request. Although, as you learned this morning, this is where GitHub Codespaces really shines. So if you're interested in trying that out, you can edit, build, and commit in one tool, and you can make much more complex changes. For now, let's assume you're working locally and you have coded the fix with your favorite editor. For me, I'm just rushing through these steps to get it over with as fast as possible. Committing should never be a huge part of my workflow, and yet it can be. And this is an example of some of the Git commands that you might have to use each time. My personal list is a lot longer because I type git status compulsively. I mean, I type it almost every other command because I don't trust anything that Git does, and I don't trust anything that I do either. And I kind of need that assurance to make sure that everything is going as planned. How can we make this easier on ourselves? Right now, if I'm not making a change on GitHub.com, I love using GitHub Desktop because it provides me a GUI that shows diffs with syntax highlighting. It lets me partially commit with checkboxes and selecting lines. It shows me what I've selected when I'm committing my code. Who needs Git status? You want to create your you want to credit your co-author? There's a spot for that. And here, I'm actually crediting Amanda Pinsker, who helped me create the slides for this talk. So thanks, Amanda. Once you're done committing, you might find yourself fetching origin, rebasing, resolving any conflicts that come about before you're ready to push. Desktop provides all of these steps with a pretty basic GUI. And this is how you can move forward, but it's also just as important to know how you can go back because regrets are real. GitHub Desktop addresses this by providing you an undo button to bring back changes from the last commit and a revert option to create a new commit to reverse those changes. And yes, you can do this with aliases, but I find that the visual cues here of showing the commit before I do something instead of passing in a SHA has made me a lot more confident before I'm taking these risks with an alias that I probably don't remember the contents of. Now, after you've pushed your code, things get interesting, which brings us to stage 4, code review. Code reviewing has 2 parts, basically, right? Creating a pull request and actually reviewing the code. It's muscle memory for us now, but creating the pull request itself requires so many steps. And this is why both local tools provide alternatives. Oops. GitHub Desktop provides a pull request option if you have a branch with pushed commits on it and no corresponding pull request. So you don't have to remember all that. It just kind of knows when it's time for you to create a pull request, and you can click on that button to get navigated directly to the page to create to the create pull request page on .com. GitHub CLI takes a different approach, and it lets you create the PR directly in the terminal, complete with titles and a body. And later this month, you'll be able to add labels and reviewers too. This is huge. If you already didn't know what to write, of course you should be able to do it without going on to .com. This example shows how you can sign all of that with flags alone. As you can see, it spits out your created pull request URL, and then you can navigate to the browser if you want. Or there's some other things that you can do. You can pass in the web flag and you can go directly to the web, just like the way that GitHub Desktop does. Or for fun, there's a fill flag that'll autofill your title and description based on your commit messages. Another hot tip is that if you're in a repository and you don't have push permission to it, submitting your pull request will allow you to create a fork so you can keep on going, which I really love. Once you create your pull request, you're in this new limbo, right? You're waiting for just another round of taking a review or seeing responses and adding these comments. So whenever you have to make these changes, especially if you do them locally to push them up, you're kind of straddling between Git and GitHub yet again. GitHub Desktop lets you go straight from your pull request to check out your branch locally. It opens a branch in Desktop and offers to stash your changes so you can check out the code, build it, and push your commits. GitHub CLI also does something similar. You could see your pull request or the ones requesting your review with peer status, which we've talked about before, and check it out directly, either by the pull request number or by the branch name. And soon you'll be able to give a basic review too. I'm so excited for that. But if you don't need to build your code or test the code locally, which my absolute favorite way to review code is on my phone, I can leave comments on lines and I can review the PR as a whole. And as an engineering manager, I'm rarely reviewing majorly technical code. I think my teams have taken pity on themselves and limited me to reviewing release notes and some simpler stuff, which is fine by me. I can do most of my reviews on GitHub Mobile now. And if I ever have complex comments, they'll just have to wait for me to come back to my desk. So they asked for this. At the last stage, if you're ready to smash that merge button and maybe even initiate a release. I've seen most cases where GitHub has done this, but technically you can do this on Git as well. So the pro tip is if you rebase or merge on master into your branch, GitHub will actually recognize it. And you might also have hooks that recognize and initiate releases based on tags. Now, you can't do this yet, but you'll also be able to view and create tags. So you don't need Git for any of these steps. You can check out this little teaser here. And this has actually been a requested feature for a while. So we're really excited to be able to provide it soon. Not yet, soon. With GitHub CLI, you'll be able to do some of this also. You can use the PR status to see which pull requests have gotten approved and are ready to be merged. And soon you'll be able to merge those pull requests and even delete the branch locally and on GitHub, which saves you a pruning step. So that's something that we haven't been able to have before. Soon, you can also close pull requests, even if you realize that you don't need to work on it anymore without going on .com. Maybe you wanted to merge, but you were waiting for CI to pass and you didn't want to be chained to your desk while you waited. GitHub Mobile gives you the freedom because now you can merge pull requests on your phone. No computer required. So now that we've seen the basic end-to-end workflow, I'm going to take you through a snapshot of the key features in case there's anything else you want to try out. So this is what Desktop has to offer, and we actually talked about a ton of these features already. Something I didn't mention is that GitHub Desktop supports enterprise and proxies, and it even provides an onboarding tutorial to get you acquainted with the Git and GitHub workflow within Desktop. I'm also a big fan of how it handles conflicts. It gives you a progress bar as you've gone through a rebase, and if you've ever struggled through the question, is this rebase going to be ever over? The progress bar is a lifesaver. It gives me hope. GitHub CLI dropped its beta a few months ago. So this feature list is a little bit thinner, but if you've been following along, they're rapidly coming out with new features. In the most recent ship, you can get and set your config, which means that you can set your Git protocol to SSH instead of it defaulting to HTTPS. I really like that. It also has a pretty solid help menu, and it has an online manual that includes example of usages. I use the online manual all the time, so I encourage you to check it out. Finally, the workflows that we went through only touched a small sampling of GitHub Mobile's functionality. My favorite ones that I haven't mentioned are being able to triage with labels, and which I need to do as a good open source contributor, and adding reactions as I check out issues. It's such a little thing, but I get such a rush of dopamine every single time I can emote with a heart or a rocket and let someone know that I'm reading their comments, which I'm obviously doing because I can do that on GitHub Mobile. As promised, there are a few features shipped in the last few months on what's coming up. Most notably, GitHub CLI and GitHub Mobile are committed to joining GitHub Desktop and supporting GitHub Enterprise by the end of the year. So this is just a tiny portion of the plan changes. The best way to keep track of what's coming up is to make sure that you're checking out GitHub's blog or following the GitHub or GH changelog Twitter accounts that update you on the latest changes. But since you've made it this far, I'll share one more secret on how you can get a sneak peek. I haven't mentioned it yet, but Desktop and CLI are open source projects, which means that they have open source project boards as well on their repository. So you can see the status of PRs as they're coming along. And GitHub Desktop actually has a link to its beta in the repositories and README. So if you want to check out this new tag feature, it's up on beta now. The caveat is that GitHub Desktop's beta can be a little bit buggier, but the team's pretty responsive if you find anything weird. And finally, here's how you can try them out. And I hope you do. So all three products have marketing sites, and it can give you an overview of some of the features and let you know how to check out their apps. Each of these also have their own versions of release notes, so you can see what's been shipped recently, either through the marketing site or then from mobile on the app itself. If you have feedback, you can open an issue directly into CLI or Desktop's open source projects, and you can always email mobilefeedback@github.com for mobile to share what you think. CLI also has a feedback survey that's linked on its help docs. It's in its help command and on the repository's README, which you can fill out and use what you need. So keep in mind that these are hardworking people and they're just doing the best that they can. So the best way to help them out is to share context on what you need, how bad the pain is, and like what actually is affecting your workflow or what you might want to use it for. The more information that you provide to us, the better we can make the better decisions that we can make. All right, we did it. We just went through a bunch of ways that you can change up your workflows using GitHub Desktop, GitHub CLI, and GitHub Mobile, which is approximately 50 alternatives. I don't expect you to have all these memorized, but you can always refer back to this diagram to see what you might want to try out. These tools are meant to extend and augment your experience, nothing more. And think about it this way. How many times have you tabbed over your browser only to get distracted by all the tabs, the email counter, the Slack bubbles, the Twitter notifications? If I want to stay focused, I'm going to need an army of bodyguards guiding me to the back door of my next page because I absolutely will get distracted. A lot of these alternatives do that for you. This is where I leave you, but I'm not gone forever. I'm still here for Q&A, and GitHub Satellite has a discussion open for each session today. So you can check mine out and ask questions about any of the applications, and my teammates are standing by to respond to you directly. That's all. I'm ready for questions. What do you have for me?
Whoa, that was an amazing, amazing talk. It wasn't 50,000 different types. It was 5. I counted Git, GitHub.com, GitHub Desktop, GitHub CLI, GitHub Mobile. I just love it. I'm excited. I'm so excited. And the thing that blew my mind is the fact that submitting a pull request will create a fork for you in a repo if you don't have push access. Get out of town. That is such an awesome feature. But before I go off, people have been asking questions, so I don't want to chew up all the time fangirling this set of products. I want to make sure we can get straight to the questions and let Cheda come in and ask his own questions as well. So GitHub user Pluma says, does and will GitHub for Windows work with WSL2? They want to know, Neha, will GitHub for Windows work with WSL2?
I think that that's a great question for a discussion, so you can get the answer directly from the developers. So I'll make sure to check into the discussion, make sure you get your answer directly there.
Yeah, cool. Chedo.
Yeah. So I'm a Vim user, and I'm really tired of tabs in the browser. So I can really see myself using a lot of CLI. The cat's out of the bag that I heard a preview of your talk yesterday. You got me really jazzed. So I've been trying out GitHub Desktop, CLI, and mobile all morning. One thing I was hoping for on mobile that I didn't find was GitHub projects. Is that on the roadmap?
Yes. So by yes, I mean yes. I'm really excited to answer your question. So let me kind of explain where we are with the 3 products. So with CLI, we've kind of started with these main workflows that everyone works in. And so we're really interested in getting feedback as to what you might use them for. And particularly, at what part in your workflow are you looking to look at your project and what do you want to do with it? For desktop, we've kind of started new integrations within the last year, and that's PRs and issues. So we kind of have this building of what your end-to-end workflow might be. And so we're kind of figuring out how we might want to integrate projects in, because as we said before, when you are on a GUI, we can easily direct you to another GUI as long as we direct you to the right place. So it's something that we're thinking about, but we want to be really conscientious about how to do it. And for mobile, this is something that they're interested in exploring. And so one of the best ways to give your thoughts is to go to the email address that I provided, or to talk about it in discussions and kind of give the feedback and what you're looking for.
Cool.
So GitHub user Shivelamba has a question. Can GitHub code spaces be accessed from GitHub Desktop?
So right now, since Codespaces is at the beginning stages, we don't have direct integration, but this is actually a conversation we're having very actively. We're interested in figuring out how we can connect the two, especially in a world where you are basically on the web and you have this environment. If you ever need to go locally, we want to be able, especially if there's demand, so let us know. We want to be able to provide that for you if this is something that you're interested in doing.
Cool. So as I mentioned, I anticipate I'd spend most of my time in the CLI more than desktop because I don't write that much code. But I'm still thinking about how and when to use what. So as you're an engineering manager and I'm an engineering manager, what kind of workflow do you recommend for managers?
All right. So for the most part, I kind of joked about it earlier. I do most of my work on .com because I'm editing copy or I'm doing a README or release notes. But there are a few cases where I might want to test something locally. In the case that I want to test something locally, especially if my review is requested, there's kind of like this way to check out. You can check it out on CLI or desktop. So I like to directly get directed to CLI or desktop. And if I know exactly what I want to do, chances are I have to build it or I have to run it in my terminal. So that's where I start using CLI. So I can use PR status at that point, and I can basically use all the tools that I need to make sure that I provide my feedback. If I'm looking into a new repository, brand new, because as a manager, and especially at GitHub, we have like all of our work on GitHub. And so I'm going through about like 30 repositories. I do all of that management on GitHub Desktop. But finally, like I'm on the go a lot, or I might be going back and forth. And so when it comes to figuring out, is there anything that's blocking me? Because I have all these repositories that I have to go in between, mobile is my go-to to kind of see if there's anything blocking. And then when I come to my computer, I'm like focused, and I can use CLI to do the builds, or a desktop to kind of work through my repositories and do any sort of commits and see like my little pretty diff.
Cool.
So I have a question also. Something else I've been thinking about is how do all of them, because there's a lot of them, how are we thinking about integrating all of them together? Like the workflow specifically.
Right now, yeah, like basically a world where you could bounce between GitHub Desktop and GitHub CLI, et cetera, and like to mobile. I think like it's a little harder to imagine a world where you might bump from mobile to CLI or desktop. One of the best parts about all of this is that all of your information is being synced, right? So the minute you push up your work from CLI and desktop, it goes to .com. And then that means that information is synced with your mobile account. So that is one of the ways we use is kind of like to sync through GitHub. And that's like, I kind of showed you that if you wanted to check out your PR, you can kind of go directly from .com to your PR. And so those are kind of like some of the ways that we've recently worked in. And if you remember the code spaces tutorial this morning, there's also this code button. And so it allows you to check out GitHub Desktop that way, for example. Now, between GitHub and CLI, we don't have a direct integration yet. But if this is something that you're interested in, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I really do mean it. I want to know, okay, what is the point that you're interested in going from desktop to CLI so that we make sure that we build the right thing? And that's one of the best parts about being in an open source world is that I can ask you that question, and then you can actually directly answer that question at any time at your leisure.
So one question is...
Go ahead, Chido.
Yeah, this is a quick one. So what does it look like for someone to contribute to the open source projects we've got?
Right. So there's two. And so with GitHub CLI and GitHub Desktop, what you'll want to do is if you have a bug or if you have a feature request, the best way to get started is to go ahead, open an issue. You'll usually see people, we have like a commitment to make sure that we respond to everyone within a week, but you'll see people respond a lot faster. We have great time zone coverage. And so there's really people who are interested in hearing more. You might hear from anyone. You might hear from our QA, you might hear from our designer, you might hear from our product manager or the developers themselves. And so that's the best way to get started. If you have an idea of something you really want to implement, going into issues helps us make sure that we can kind of solve the problem correctly together. And then if you want to open a pull request, you can kind of request that. And then we'll even help you get the pull request over the line, especially if it's something that we've all agreed that we want to work on together.
Thank you so much, Neha. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.